Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second episode of Values Unpacked. Unpacking truth, inspiring purpose, and building lives one conversation at a time. I'm one of your co hosts, Irving Henry. Thank you for taking the time to join us today on what we believe will be a meaningful conversation.
And I'm your other co-host. I'm John Chester Innes. Today we are joined by our Member of Parliament, Miss Coretta McDonald. She is the president of the Guyana Teachers Union, and she is also the Member of Parliament for a Partnership for National Unity Party. Our guest today is absolutely no stranger in public life um, in Guyana, and so without further delay, we would go right into our program. Miss McDonald, we know that we know the public you, but could you tell us of who Coretta McDonald is? What shaped the person that you are today, and what are some of the values that you hold dear?
Well, good morning to both of you. Good morning to your viewing audience. And it's a pleasure for me to be here. Coretta McDonald. Who's Coretta McDonald? Coretta McDonald is just an individual who thinks that rights should be recognized, persons should be respected for who they are. And together, if we work, um, we can make things possible. Coretta McDonald is an educator. She's a mother. She's one who loves the Lord. I know this is not a program, a religious program, but I must say that I have I was brought up in the Adventist church, that's the Seventh Day Adventist church, and the values taught in the church are the ones that guide me up to now. And those values are simple. Integrity being the most important of all. Integrity, character, and speaking your truth wherever you are, regardless of how it's going to offend the persons, you must speak the truth and you must be caring to all, just the same way you would expect persons to be caring towards you. And that's simply Coretta McDonald.
All right. So you also wear dual hats in public life. So as president of GTU and as a member of parliament, which we all know, what are some of the tools that you have used so far to navigate those roles?
Well, let me tell you what. As a trade unionist, coming out of trade unionism, national politics was birthed. So they are interrelated, except one in the trade union movement is where you manage a smaller group of persons, and that's about 15,000 teachers. In the national politics, you have to care for everyone. And so the values intertwine, like I said, and they're related to each other, where you advocate at the trade union level for rights, equal pay, better conditions of work, and a whole host of it. At the national politics is where you, as a politician, you're expected to sit there as the mediator between government, if you're not in government, between government and the people. If you were in government, then you were there to govern all. And so the values and some of the attributes that I would advocate or that I've been using to man both caps that I wear are simple, like I said earlier. It deals with integrity, the way you value people and how you treat people, the way you advocate for others. And so I just don't want to go the full school with that, but simply that is what I use to wear my two caps, and those are the values that I project out there. And once you have that, then everything else will fall into place.
Thank you so much for your answer to that question, Ms. McDonald. I would like to draw attention to the national tragedy that has happened in Guyana recently. You know,
Mm,
that has captivated Guyana and Guyanese in the diaspora and throughout the world. The MV BARIMA tragedy, which spread and become a national conversation about public safety, government accountability, emergency preparedness, transportation infrastructure, transparency, and a long list of other things,
mm,
including the psychological impact on the lives of survivors and Guyanese as a whole. As investigations continues, several key issues emerge in my mind. Um, for instance, conflicting passenger numbers,
Mhm.
survivor accounts, the government response, and public perception. What is your initial response to this tragedy, and what are your views on how the government responded in the wake of this tragedy?
Well, first of all, let me extend my heartfelt condolences to all of those persons who have lost loved ones in this tragedy, and to offer God's comfort to them at this time. This tragedy is, like we said, it's a national one, but it's one that should not have happened. It could have been avoided. It is sad that we have to go through this phase again. It's unfortunate. And you know, it represents and it brings us to the point where incompetence is written all over. Apart from that, this tragedy brings back to memory the tragedy of the murder of the Henry Boys, the Orin
Mm,
Boston issue, the Quindon Bacchus, the Headley Boys, the Adriana Young, the Madia 20, the Helicopter 5. And so it seems as if no learning has taken place after we would have had no learning whatsoever. No
mm,
systems have been put in place. And one can simply cap this, like I said, as being incompetent on the part of the government. Now we're here, and many families are broken.
mm,
Many communities are disrupted. An entire nation is in mourning because of systemic failures. Again, this should not have happened.
We hear you. And so, in your view, what are the biggest, I'm asking to be very specific here, what do you think are the biggest failures surrounding this tragedy?
It's systemic failures in nature. And but when we go into more details, we look at management, we look at training, we look at responses. How do we respond? Whether these were in place, safety measures. It's a whole host of issues that would compound what has happened that were not in place. Loading of ferries. Who supervises that? Comparing what you have on the manifest with what is happening. And let me say, there during the 2015-2020 period when the coalition government was in place, there was a monitoring system that was instituted. But it's sad to say that when governments leave and governments take over, we don't build on the good fortunes or the good management systems that have been put in place. We
mhm,
discard them. And that's simply stupid. So that entire monitoring system that was instituted in between 2015 to 2020, that was discarded. And as a result of that, we are finding out, and we're having to experience what we're experiencing now. If
Mm,
there was the monitoring team there to monitor what was going on that ferry, to ensuring what you have on your manifest, that was exactly what was there, then we may not have had this system. Management,
mhm,
maintenance. How often were we maintaining this vessel? And let me say to our viewers, this vessel is 87 years old. I'm not
mhm,
saying that to say that it should not have been seaworthy. But if proper maintenance was done, then it's obvious that this ferry would have been a good ferry to transport from point A to point B. Secondly, I'm not sure that the passage and the hours long that this ferry has to take to get to its destination, if that was in. Now, this ferry left one afternoon at 3 o'clock. and then it was going to get to its destination at 5:30 the next afternoon. So you're talking about many, many hours.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I am not sure that I understand what it means to be traveling all those hours. And
Yeah.
it is unfortunate that ordinary people have to endure these kinds of discomfort, while those in authority, they can fly from point A to point B in less than half an hour, in 3/4 of an hour, in an hour. They don't have to struggle there. And I'm sure you would have seen the pictures which showed you how our passengers, how our citizens, they were sleeping in hammocks, some were sleeping on the floor. And all of these issues are management issues that should be looked at. But look, there's a saying that says, out of every evil cometh good. It's unfortunate that lives had to be lost. Many, many lives, not one, not two, not
Yeah.
hundreds of lives that we will never know. Because I can tell you what, 67 passengers were rescued earlier. And of that 67, 32 of those who were rescued, their names were not on the manifest. So that in itself is telling you that the numbers that were touted by the Minister of Public Works is far from the truth. And how is it that 32 persons were on a ferry and nobody knew that 32 persons were on that ferry? It was listed nowhere at all. And so here we have the disconnect between management, the disconnect between ministry, and this is what happens. And so it brings into play the word that has been banned from Parliament: corruption. And corruption is not something that happens at a flash. It is something that is continuously happening. And who is putting their foot down against this? Nobody, because maybe all of us are part and parcel of the corruption. When you hear the recount of the survivors and they tell you of how packed that ferry was, when you hear some of the crew members talk about the instructions that they were given to put this on the ferry, and you must have this on, and you must have that on, then it says that persons have been micromanaging what is supposed to have happened. You have a crew out there, you have persons at Transport and Harbors who are supposed to man what is happening there, but then you have authorities higher than them who come to give a phone call with instructions, and they have to comply because persons, I think we have lost our way somewhat, and fear and the threats that have come our way not so long ago has caused persons to pull into their shells rather than standing up and speaking out. You're fearful that you're going to be dismissed, you're going to be suspended, you're going to lose pay. And in these trying times, persons can't afford that.
Yeah. Ms. McDonald, you touched a little bit about an oversight, and my next question would be about that. If you can talk a little bit more specific about mechanisms that should have prevented this disaster.
Look, if you have a car, and most of us do, we have our cars. We know that some cars are 5-seaters. So we carry 5 passengers. If we were to carry a 6th passenger, that passenger has to be a little child. And even then you would have discomfort. And we don't want to put our car under pressure. So we don't do that. We have some other cars that are 7-seaters, some are 8-seaters. And we stick to what is prescribed there by the manufacturers. We know that we're supposed to service our car after driving so many miles. We know that we have to check our water, our oil. We have to start the car and allow it to run for a couple of minutes before we start driving off. We know that we have to put whatever in our trunk, we put that in the trunk department. And we know that we can't carry more than that. And so these are the missteps that would have occurred on that fateful Friday afternoon, where the MV BARIMA was under stress for the longest while. As a matter of fact, in 2024, the Minister of Public Works, Juan Ejil, he stood in Parliament and he gave that glorious speech about this new ferry that was bought for hundreds of millions of dollars. And that ferry was supposed to retire the MV Barima and MV Kimbia that were plying the same route that goes to Region 1. But yet in 2026, we have the very same ferry that was supposed to have been retired plying the same route. Now, you heard all the stories. The vessel was stuck on the sandbank. It took 45 minutes for them to push it off. It was moving on one engine. Now, for a distance that long, why couldn't we have a barge going alongside that vessel? The captains complained to both ministers Indar and One Edgel about all the deficiencies in this vehicle. They were promised that this would have been the last run, and then the vessel would have been docked to correct all that is happening. One needs to understand, and one needs to figure out whether human lives were valuable or they were counted as being valued as against making some extra dollars, whether the lives were more valuable or making the extra dollars were valuable. One needs to come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
And here we can see that lives were not valued. Ordinary people's lives were not valued. And so we allowed a ferry that was sick, let me put it in that way, that was sick, very, very sick, to have gone out there. And we have what is the result here? When you listen to the minister, the prime minister, and when you listen to the accounts coming from the survivors, it varies a whole lot. And so it is saying to us that the government, one, they have been very arrogant, very insensitive, and very disrespectful to this entire nation. Simple questions posed problems for them, and the inaccuracies that they kept peddling, and so this nation is now left to wonder how many more persons, because those bodies that have been recovered are the ones that floated up, and when you look at the manner with which that vessel sunk, it is saying to us, and then when you hear of the recounts from the survivors who tell you loads and loads of cargo were thrown upon them and they had to fight their way out and so on, you understand clearly that many more persons are trapped in there. And the question that lingers in your mind is, why is it that the government is taking so long to pull that vessel? Why is it taking them so long? But we know the answers. Secondly, and I think I'm jumping out here to say maybe what some of what you're going to ask, the response time. Why did it have to take this government more than 6 hours to get on site? And so it brings into play that we are not prepared. We are not prepared to deal with instances like these, and we should be. What has happened to the life jackets that the passengers were supposed to have been wearing? We saw none of that happening. And this tells of the callous nature of this irresponsible government. I mean, I might be sounding political, but there is nothing political about lives that are being lost. One life is too much. Much more. 6 to 9 we're getting at this point. How many more are we going to hear about? And I'm saying some families will never have closure to what has happened here. But let me prong it off to say that it's unfortunate and it should never have happened.
You're saying that you're sounding political, but sometimes it's difficult not to sound that way. But my follow-up question: how can we have this discussion, right? Because we have to talk about this strategy. How can we have this discussion in a more meaningful way without politicizing the suffering that these families are experiencing?
So our solution should be, one, a unified approach. I don't know everything. You don't know everything. None of us have all the answers to any particular problem. And so my notion here is that our actions should be unified. We should sit together. We have a ferry. How are we going to allow this ferry to move off? One, we must have professionally trained persons to man the ferries. Two, we must have continuous training for our crew members who are going to be manning ferries like these. Continuous professional training. Three, safety. And safety comes with wearing life jackets. Safety comes with how we pack the vessels, ensuring that the number that is associated with cargo, that's the number we stick to. The number of passengers, we stick to that. Whether this ferry should be, then the amount of times that this ferry should be going unseen. The amount of times we should be servicing this ferry. Having persons who are engineers who are qualified to do the servicing and to advise on what should be happening. And broadly, those are some of the areas that we are supposed to have unified position on if we are going to conduct these kinds of travels. Secondly, we must be able to we must have one, preparedness. How do we get into action if there were to be a casualty? What do we do? Who do we send out first? Who comes second? How do we monitor in terms of notifying the nation, our press conferences to the nation? How do we do that? How do we our transmission system between central, and that's the tower I'm talking about here, and the crew members, the kind of vessel, most of all, the kind of vessel that we will put there, whether it can accommodate the kind of lashing out there from high waves and that kind of rough seas. So these are all the things that we have to look at in terms of putting solutions so that we would never ever have an issue or a tragedy like this again. And then it has all the other technicalities that we will use the technical people to deal with. But there must be a unified approach to what we do henceforth. So if we're going to talk about speedboats, and these are the smaller vessels, we must have that approach. If we're going to talk about the larger vessels, we must have that approach. Just the same way we do when we have our smaller crafts flying from point A to point B. You tell them about the safety measures that you expect them to adhere to. If there's a drop in air, what they should be doing. All of these things should be looked at the technical level, but the approach must be unified, because saving lives is what is important. Comfort is what is important. And our people should never feel dissatisfied when public transportation is offered to them or when they have to use public transportation.
We hear you.
I noticed, John, before you go,
Yes.
I just wanted to follow, because we're talking about taking a unified approach.
Mhm.
I noticed there was an attempt made, at least at a press conference, for this unified approach by some of the political parties there in Guyana. Was this initiated by the sitting government, or was this an initiative from the other parties? And were all the parties invited to this press conference, if that's what it was?
So you're talking about the press conference that was hosted by the joint opposition. The press
Yes.
conference hosted by the joint opposition will never ever be one initiated by the government. As a matter of fact, let me say, if the government did not even think about inviting the opposition to sit at their press conference, then you would understand they will never ever have that kind of message being advocated. And let me say to you, the government did not even want to have opposition member of parliament in the vicinity to give comfort to those family members who have suffered. But let's get to the press conference. At the press conference, it was a joint opposition press conference. Most of the political parties were invited to that press conference.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so less than 24 hours ago, President Irfan Ali, he informed Guyanese that today, July 26th, he would be announcing a 5-member commission of inquiry to inquire into the circumstances of the capsizing of the MV BARIMA and any, as he put it, I believe he used the word interrelated issues relative to that tragedy. What are your initial thoughts about the president's announcement?
Well, we welcome that. As a matter of fact, the opposition were the first to have shouted for a COI to investigate this entire tragedy. I'm disappointed, though, that the president would have gone out there to announce that he is going to indeed have a COI to conduct the investigations. But he is the person who would be selecting the members to form that COI. You see, there's a saying again that says you can't put cat to watch milk. And so if I'm going to put myself there to investigate me, then you know what I mean. We're not going to have an investigation that is fair. And let me take us back to the COI that was launched to investigate the Madhya 20. To date, the persons who were supposed to have been there to give testimony, to give evidence, to have been cross-questioned, they were not there. They did not form that group to go there. We did not see coming out of that COI the persons who were supposed to have been held responsible, being held responsible. So this COI, while we welcome that, while I welcome it, I don't think what this nation is hoping to achieve from a COI is what we are going to get coming from that. You cannot have a COI there to investigate a tragedy that would have been caused by persons who are incompetent, including government ministers. And then you're going to put persons who are closely associated with the government to investigate this. Because at the end of the day, I am still looking for my bread. And where is my bread coming from? The government. And so I am not going to play any different tune. And let me say this, very few persons you have who will stand there to say, this is what caused this tragic incident. And that these persons are supposed to be held responsible. Very few persons you have who will stand to say that. So in my mind, the president should have gone out there to say, because I don't think from the top of his head he decided, look, I'm going to have a COI. It had to have been given thought. And so that in itself should have said to the president, look, I would want to ask whether it is the opposition or some other credible agency to please submit to us 4 names, 5 names, and we can choose 3 from that and we will supply 2 other names. Or you choose 5 names and we will put 4 names. And we will pull a committee that is going to be made up of 7 persons or 6 persons or 5 persons. But for the government to choose all the persons, that in itself will leave many more questions than answers.
I have one quick follow-up question, and I know we try to make this podcast around 30 minutes. Based on what you know, is there going to be any parliamentary oversight of the COI?
I am not sure there is going to be any. As a matter of fact, tomorrow there's going to be a sitting of parliament. And since the president, the thing is, looking at all of the follow-ups that have happened during this tragedy, all we are seeing the government doing is putting plasters on sore, doing damage control. Every time somebody pop up with something, you have a damage control system put in place. And so the fact that the president is going to announce the members of a COI today, tomorrow there is little or nothing that Parliament would be able to do, because you're going to hear there is a COI that has been set up. And so we cannot say this and we cannot say that, and you can't do this because you don't want it to influence what will come out or prejudice what will come out of the COI. So Parliament, members of Parliament will have little or nothing much to ask on this very issue.
Ms. McDonald, as we come to an end of today's podcast, our platform is about values, dealing with good values. So I just want to ask this question, because we can't end without talking about values, right? What what values should shape how our government officials function, not just how they respond to this tragedy, but what values should they be operating under on a continuous basis?
These values are not anything new. Mr. Henry and Mr. Innes, we have learned values from the age of maybe one, or might be earlier than that, where our parents teach us at home: you must be kind, you must be honest, you have to share, you have to learn to adapt. And so these values are not anything new that we have to go to university to learn. What happens with our values is that they become modified or more modified as we grow older. And so we expect that as public individuals and individuals who hold public offices, that we must be honest. Character and integrity matters. And so that in itself is the overshadowing value that will inculcate all the others. We must exhibit professional attitudes. You ask a question, you should not be barking at people, regardless of how silly the question might sound, or if you feel that this question is asked there to put you on a spot. You must be very calm and polite in your way of answering the question. And I'm saying that to refer to this. Calls have been made for the Minister of Public Works to resign. And you know what we got from the Prime Minister? The Prime Minister was very callous and very insensitive to this whole issue, where he outlined that he has termed the calls for the resignation as noise. Noise. I've heard the noise. I've heard the noise. And this reporter, you're adding to the noise. That is very irresponsible. And so character, integrity is what are the values that should shape any government. And if it can't be found in a minister or two, then those persons are not yet ready for public life. They're not ready to hold public office. They're not ready to be earning taxpayers' monies to fund their lavish lifestyles. And so again, care for others is one of the attributes that we must always hold dear to our hearts. And you know, the Bible has said to us, we should love our neighbors as ourselves. And so what we want for us, we must do that for others. You know, the Prime Minister, again, let me say this, the Prime Minister would never travel on MV BARIMA. The President would never travel on that boat. And so because you wouldn't do this, you shouldn't allow it to happen to others. And so those general characteristics or morals that I've just listed, which would include many others, are the basic ones that should govern any government. Transparency, accountability, responsibility, these should govern any public official.
Ms. McDonald,
thank you so much
Member
for your
of Parliament.
response.
Yes. We want to thank you for taking time to be with us this morning, and thank you for the work that you're doing for the citizens of Guyana, and for being with us to discuss specifically the MV BARIMA tragedy, Our thoughts and our prayers continue to be with those families who have been directly affected and Guyana as it mourns as a nation. To our listeners, we would like to thank you for listening. This has been Values Unpacked. We're asking that you stay curious, you stay grounded, and you keep unpacking those values that have shaped your life. Miss McDonald, again, we would like to thank you, and we will close off this second episode of Values Unpacked. Thank you again, and we do hope that you have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me here. And to our viewers, do have a wonderful day. Continue to pray for our families here.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
We do look forward to you being with us in our next episode. Please do remember to share our podcast on your various platforms and support the work that we're doing by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Until next time, this has been Values on Pack.